Hello everyone, I'm Akina Fong. E-payment has now become a part of our daily lives. New and innovative consumption models have been launched accordingly. Apart from the widely used e-wallets, virtual banks and cryptocurrencies are more and more popular. Meanwhile, the regulations targeting such financial products have been tightened and countless documents are required to be submitted. Therefore, merchants may consider that such application process is really very complicated and troublesome. In fact, it is closely related to the anti-money laundering AML requirements. Today, we have Mary, expert in AML and Sanctions services, and Michelle, head of legal from Payment Asia here to talk about the concept of AML and how AML requirements affect the financial industry and even SMEs. The full name of AML is Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Financing of Terrorism. It seems that it's something in movie plots only and has no relationship with the general law-abiding public. So, what is it? Mary, could you tell us more about this?
Money laundering is the process of cleaning up the dirty money. It is a process to turn the proceeds of crime into legitimate and usable funds. There are typically three stages in money laundering. First, placement. Physical disposal of proceeds derived from illegal activities into the financial system. Layering. Separating illicit proceeds from their source by creating complex layers of financial transactions designed to disguise the source of the fund and subvert the audit trail. And lastly, integration. Creating the impression of apparent legitimacy to criminally derived wealth. Terrorist financing is something different. Money may come from legitimate or criminal source to finance any forms of terrorist-related actions. For examples of terrorist financing including drug dealing, smuggling weapons, etc. In Hong Kong, we have designated authorities to investigate money laundering cases and terrorist financing offences and has equipped them with the necessary powers. The primary investigative authorities are the Hong Kong Police Force and the Customs Excise Department. In the event that ML and TF offences are facilitated by corruption, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, ICAC, will investigate such cases. The Joint Financial Intelligence Unit, JFIU, is a joint unit staffed by officers from Hong Kong Police and Customs Excise Department. And they are responsible to receive, analyze, and disseminate disclosure of suspicious transactions reports and other relevant information concerning suspected ML or TF activities. All these authorities and other competent authorities meet on a regular basis to review MLTF typology and trends.
Then, could you explain further on the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter-Terrorist Financing Ordinance and what was the reason and drive for its legislation?
Sure, Akina. The Financial Action Task Force, FATF, is an intergovernmental body established in 1989. The objectives of the FATF are to set standards and promote effective implementation of legal, regulatory, and operational measures for combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and other related threats to the integrity of the international financial system. It also reviews money laundering and terrorist financing techniques and continuously strengthens its standard to address new risks, such as the regulations of virtual assets, which have spread as cryptocurrencies gain popularity. They also developed FATF recommendations since 2012, and all these FATF standards to ensure to coordinate a global response to prevent organized crime, corruption, and terrorism. FATF monitors countries to ensure they implement all these standards fully and effectively, and holds countries to accountable that they need to comply with these recommendations. And that's why Hong Kong has been examined back in 2018 by FATF. Currently, Hong Kong adopts a risk-based approach toward governing the financial and non-financial institutions through the AML ordinance. This ordinance provides for the statutory requirements relating to customer due diligence and record keeping for specified financial institutions designated non-financial business and professional DNFBP, and the powers of the relevant authorities to supervise the relevant sectors within the requirements. This ordinance is very important because they're providing also a licensing regime for money service operators through Custom and Excise Department, trust through the Register of Companies, and also under this AMLO, the designated relevant authorities, including Hong Kong Monetary Authority, Insurance Authority, Securities and Futures Commission, and Custom and Excise Department, the Law Society of Hong Kong, the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the Estate Agents Authority, and the Company Registry. They all require to publish guidelines for their respective sectors. This guidelines is intended for use by all these relevant sectors and the officers and staff. And this guidelines is so important because they will provide a general background to let all the institutions to know how to mitigate all the ML and TF risk. And also they provide a practical guidelines so that all these institutions and their senior management, they can know how to design and implement their policies, procedures, controls in the relevant operational areas, taking into consideration, of course, their special circumstances, business size, customer size, and product, in order to make sure they meet the relevant statutory and regulatory requirements. These guidelines, of course, will be revised from time to time, and same as our AML ordinance. The revised AML ordinance is expected to be effective in the year 2022. According to the AML ordinance, PAPs are often divided into three types: local, foreign, and international organizational PAP. The definition for domestic and foreign PAP is defined as an individual who is or has been entrusted with a prominent public function in a place inside or outside the People's Republic of China, and includes a head of state, head of government, senior politician, senior government, judicial, or military official, senior executive of a state-owned corporation, and an important political party official, but does not include any middle-ranking or more junior official or any of the category. It will cover also the spouse, a partner, a child, or parent of an individual falling within what I defined just right now, and or the spouse or partner of a child of such an individual. It also covers a close associate of the individual as well. For international organizational PAP, it defined as those individual who is or has been entrusted with a prominent function by an international organization, and it will include members of senior management, that is directors, deputy directors, and members of the board or equivalent functions. Again, middle-ranking and more junior officials of the international organization will be excluded. Same as what I just mentioned, spouse, partner, child, parent, individual falling within the paragraph above, or spouse of a partner of a child of such an individual will also be included, and also the close associate of this such individual.
But I'm quite curious, how is close associate defined? Will a family member or romantic relationships such as boyfriends, girlfriends can be considered as close associate?
Yes, Akina. Close associate is defined as an individual who has close business relationship with a person, including an individual who is a beneficial owner of a legal person or trust of which the person is also a beneficial owner, or an individual who is the beneficial owner of a legal person or trust that is set up for the benefit of a person who is a PAP.
I also noted a term called politically exposed person, or PEP, has been mentioned a number of times by Mary. Could you further elaborate how are they associated with money laundering risks?
Yes, the associate risk of PAP actually covers a lot, including the current and former PAPs that typically of senior positions, and they will have certain level of authority. So PAP, why they will have a higher risk? Because they will be getting a higher risk of involved in bribery and corruption by virtue of their standing and influence in default compared to the other individuals. They may indirectly obtain funds through their immediate family members or close associates in obtaining the personal gains, or utilizing their position and power to impose undue pressure to organization or any individual in obtaining some personal gain. Reputational damage to financial service provider is really critical. So that's why the regulatory risk from inadequate AML policy and procedures on PAP is very high. All the institutions, they should actually maintain a database. They can actually subscribe a database which will have a list of persons regarding PAP or sanctioned person. And this database can help them to actually detect any PAP or sanctions individual having customer or their transactions involved. And they need to know these people, whether they will be entered into business with, or be very clear if they have any sanctioned individual entities involved. In particular, for actually sanctions-related individual and entities, the HAMA expects all these to be screened on a regular basis as and when the list has been updated. And also, if you find any transactions of relationship with these individuals and entities, should be reported to JFRU ASAP.
I understand the regulations for financial institutions have been tightening in recent years. So moving forward, what is your expectation for the future in terms of regulatory trends and developments? Would Michelle share more views with us?
Sure. Actually, we have been experiencing a great payment change in the past 5 to 10 years, with more payment methods and remittance channels rolling out year by year, coupled with the rise of virtual currencies. Online fraud and money laundering behavior are also emerging endlessly. Naturally, relevant regulations and controls need to be tightened to ensure the safety of transactions by the public. In particular, small and medium-sized enterprises may lack expertise in this area and therefore may fall into a trap without knowing it. With that in mind, when regulations are tightened in the future, it is important to educate the public and also to raise merchants' awareness on AML issues. Payment Asia, being a payment service provider, is committed to complying with AML regulatory requirements. For example, in processing merchant applications, our electronic application platform would mandatorily require applicants to upload specific documents and information. And then we would use OCR technology and WorldCheck, an internationally recognized screening tool, to improve the speed and accuracy of the approval process.
Yes, Michelle. And also, as there are more products in the market, new payment methods being introduced, for example, cryptocurrencies, regulators are trying to amend and update the relevant regulations to cope with this fast-changing industry. Though new regulations are trying to block out the loophole of the previous edition of the regulation, there will always be criminals that are able to find new loopholes or bugs within the new edition to continue their illegal activities. And therefore, the AML regulations is likely to be more and more strengthened and tightened.
Thank you very much for the explanation. Initially, I thought it is really troublesome to submit so many documents, but I believe that everyone should agree that those process is essential after knowing the concept of AML. So, would you share more about the importance of the AML ordinance to the ordinary citizens?
Sure. As an international financial center, Hong Kong places great importance in safeguarding the integrity and stability of our financial system by implementing an effective anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism regime. Without an effective regime to deter and detect the flow of illicit funds in accordance with international standards, it opens the opportunity for criminals and terrorists to run rampant, leading to dire consequences in the entire community. Hong Kong Monetary Authority is the relevant regulatory body regulating Payment Asia's business partners, such as SVF licensees and other financial institutions. Merchants using Payment Asia's platform to open merchant accounts are required to go through a CDD and KYC process prior to being onboarded. Subsequent to onboarding, merchants would be subject to ongoing monitoring in two aspects: ongoing CDD and transaction monitoring. Merchants may think that their business information is confidential, but actually, they have the responsibility to continuously demonstrate the legitimacy of their businesses and transactions so that we are able to fulfill compliance requirements. Recently, there were some online scammers who impersonated real retail chain stores and accepted payment through online transactions. Not only did the consumers not receive the items for which they had paid, but it was also difficult for them to investigate the matter because everything was conducted online. AML controls are in place so that residents feel safer in the community, knowing that regulated bodies and regulators are doing what they can as gatekeepers to maintain the integrity and stability of our financial system.
You just mentioned customer due diligence, CDD. So how does it work? Not sure if my personal experience can be the example of illustration. I set up a company a few years ago and applied for a business account in a bank in Hong Kong. I was asked so many questions like the business of my company, the background of my clients, income sources, etc. Are these questions related to CDD too?
So CDD, customer due diligence, and KYC, know your customer, these concepts are very similar, and they are the key components of AML practices. KYC is a process by which institutions verify the identities of customers and evaluate the risk of working with them. So the idea of CDD and KYC is basically to gain as much information about the customer as possible, such as know who you're actually dealing with, know the beneficiaries of the transactions, know the purposes and nature of the transactions, and know the sources of the funds involved.
Not only what Michelle just mentioned, the regulator also wants to know the details of this merchant thoroughly. For example, who is their ultimate beneficial owner, what industry they are in, is there any physical shop or is it only an online store, or have they ever been involved in any court cases or adverse media?
Yes, that's right. In the documentation aspect, KYC involves obtaining documents from merchants such as business registration certificate, certificate of incorporation, latest annual return, bank account statement, details of the ownership and control structure of the company, price list of products, and evidence of source of products, etc. This information would help us understand the nature, size, and complexity of each business, and whether the transactions carried out are consistent with our knowledge of the merchant, our merchant's business, risk profile, and source and destination of funds. We hope that our merchants would understand why we require them to provide us with so many documents. It is really just to protect all of us and to give merchants and consumers confidence that we are serious about preventing and detecting ML and TF activities.
Then why do merchants need to cooperate with onboarding and ongoing CDD and transaction monitoring procedures? How does it work?
So there is an approval process for onboarding merchants as part of the compliance requirements imposed by HKMA. Payment Asia needs to carry out risk assessments to identify the risk level of each merchant upon its onboarding. Merchant applicants may cooperate by filling out our application form as accurately as possible. Just to make a short digression here, we understand that the application process might be a little bit complicated, so we have made some videos to help merchants go through the entire application process. Coming back to the question on how a merchant can cooperate with us, I find that oftentimes after a merchant is onboarded, it would think that its AML responsibilities have ended. But actually, that is not the case. Payment Asia would continue to do ongoing monitoring and communicate with merchants on an ongoing basis to assess whether there are any changes in the merchant's risk level. When merchants are contacted by us, it is important that they cooperate with us by providing the information that we request.
Michelle just mentioned that the process of KYC includes collecting and handling merchants' sensitive information. Indeed, this is my most worrying part. As you know, there are many hackers in the online world. And how would Payment Asia protect the customer's privacy?
Our e-application form will lead you to our company's personal information collection statement, we call it PICS, which sets out our policies and practices with respect to the collection and use of personal data. One of the main purposes of collection of such data is to carry out KYC, to comply with AML and CFT regulations, and to provide you with our services. In regard to security, when you enter sensitive information on our registration or order forms online, we encrypt that information using secure socket layer technology. We also put in place suitable procedures to safeguard and secure the information we collect offline. In regard to privacy, we will keep all personal data according to the guidance set by Personal Data Privacy Ordinance. We will only retain and use the personal data for as long as the merchant's account is active, or as needed to provide services to the merchant and for the period of time which is necessary to fulfill the purpose of use of such data. We will not use an individual's personal data other than for the purposes as set out in the PICS, unless with the data subject's consent. Therefore, merchants need not worry about Payment Asia selling their data to third parties for monetary gain.
I can imagine under the stringent AML regulations, your side encounters many questions from the merchants. And what are the implications on Payment Asia or other companies in the payment industry? And what responsibilities should be undertaken by such companies?
Yes, Akina. Under payment industry, all transactions are conducted via online platform. The volume and frequency of transactions could be huge, and therefore payment industry has a high money laundering and terrorist financing risk. For example, digital onboarding imposes a higher risk than traditional face-to-face onboarding. Staffs are unable to verify the merchant's or their owner's identity physically, which can only rely on the digital system during the onboarding.
Yes, Mary. The AML regulatory measures have been tightening year by year. Payment tool partners and banks have required our payment technology providers to formulate AML control measures. Therefore, we must formulate and implement internal AML policies, including new merchant account opening, regular review, etc., to regularly assess the risk level of merchants and to formulate corresponding measures. Our payment tool partners and banks regularly review our AML policies and implementation to fulfill HKMA's requirements. If they fail to carry out their duties to continuously monitor business relationships, they may be subject to disciplinary actions and pecuniary penalties. Recently, a few banks were fined by HKMA due to this failure, and the total amount of the fines were more than 40 million Hong Kong dollars. The consequences of non-compliance by regulated institutions can be extremely serious. As a middleman between merchants and payment tool companies, Payment Asia needs to strike a balance between streamlining the account opening process and AML compliance. It hopes to follow the guidelines of regulatory agencies and improve CDD standards and efficiency, so as to ensure the safety of merchant transactions and ensure merchants don't fall into the money laundering trap, also to lower the risk of being the subject of investigation. We provide the payment technology as well as acquiring services for SVF licensees and credit card companies. Since there is the risk of potential ML or TF activities taking place via our payment platform where various transactions are processed, we are committed to maintaining robust AML CFT controls to detect and deter ML TF activities and manage the risks to which it may be exposed. We would also cooperate with regulated bodies to comply with any AML CFT sanctions compliance laws and regulations in Hong Kong.
From the perspective of the SMEs, what is the relationship between AML regulations and one's own businesses?
Well, the commonly used e-wallet apps and some payment tool service providers are regulated by the HKMA. As a partner of such service providers, Payment Asia has certain guidelines to follow. The scope of HKMA's regulation includes the transactions of various payment tools. So, regardless of whether your business scale is large or small, All merchants involved in these transactions will naturally fall under HKMA's AML controls with no exemption because there is a chance that customers will use these platforms to launder money. For Payment Asia, it is very important for us to know our merchants and to take corresponding measures to detect suspicious transactions. Even for small and medium enterprises, we would do our best to prevent and detect potential ML or TF risks. Merchants can regard the KYC and ongoing monitoring as a formal procedure or channel for them to prove that their business is compliant with the law and is reasonable and legitimate. I'm sure that after watching our sharing, law-abiding merchants would surely be willing to cooperate with us to fulfill such AML requirements.
Is it easy for merchants to fall into the trap of money laundering?
Yes, Akina. Due to the nature of the merchants, they are likely to be exposed to multiple money inflow daily from an unknown third party. In the world of AML CFT, one of the common methods of laundering money is smurfing. Smurfing refers to the method of structuring a large sum of money into small amounts and injecting them into the market, which might confuse the transaction monitoring system to think that they are legitimate transactions as the amount of the transactions were not particularly high. This could be an approachable idea for the money launderers to launder their money through these merchants via the payment system by using the QR code obtained from a third party.
Yes, that's right, Mary. The use of technology is increasing in tandem with the times. As the type of businesses are changing through the use of new technologies, so is the pace of financial transactions. E-commerce is one of the means of trading goods and services through the internet. Therefore, criminals would make use of new technology to handle crime proceeds and to disguise the money as coming from legitimate activities. Merchants might easily fall into the trap.
For SMEs or startups, what are their responsibilities to fulfill the AML requirements, and what can they do when facing difficulties?
Well, as mentioned previously, regardless of whether your business scale is large, medium, or small, there are no exemptions to HKMA's AML requirements.
Yes, Michelle. Payment Asia should ensure that all documents were obtained before onboarding the merchant. If the merchant is unwilling to provide certain documents, Payment Asia has the authority to reject the merchant's applications and prohibit them from onboarding with the company. As part of this KYC process, Payment Asia is required to verify all the documents obtained and ensure that they are all legitimate. Any discovery of falsified documents might lead to criminal offenses filed against that person or merchant in accordance with the ordinance.
We only require the most basic company and operation documents and information from our merchants. If merchants encounter any difficulties in the process, they may make further inquiries with Payment Asia.
After the discussion, I learned that AML is closely related to all businesses and our daily lives, and therefore cooperating with payment service providers with professional teams that comply with regulatory requirements is a great protection for everyone. I've learned a lot today. Mary and Michelle, thank you very much for your sharing. See you all next time. Goodbye! I believe you will have better understanding after watching this video. Please feel free to leave your comment to Payment Asia if you have any question.